An important aspect of this course is teaching you how to become better at problem solving and decision making in a marketing context. So let's talk a little bit about this idea of problem solving and making decisions. Everyone that you talk to and every book that you read and every article that you read about problem solving has a set of steps. Here I have a set of steps from 5 different readings, all from the same collection of readings. And you'll notice that I just have them named here, readings 1 through 5. But each one has a set of problem solving steps. And each one is, in many cases, similar, but also in many cases different. And everybody preaches that theirs is the right way to go through this problem solving process. But they're all mostly the same thing, right? And so we start off with all of them have some version of identifying the issue or the problem. And of course, you'll see that that's the starting point for all the readings and for everybody who is doing any sort of problem solving is identify the problem. And of course, this is a little bit more difficult than it sounds because we need to identify symptoms and causes and the actual problem. And so we need to be able to understand what the problem is and then look for symptoms of that problem or what is causing that problem to happen. And in marketing, of course, it could be something quite different than what we think when we first look at the issue or problem or first identify it. The second step for most of these is gathering data. That is finding out what's really going on here. And so in some cases, it's finding the cause. In other cases, it's gathering and analyzing data. Looking at what data do we need to have in front of us to make decisions. Now, you'll notice that everyone talks about this. Many people who are problem solvers and who are not skilled at problem solving don't go through this step. They just see a problem and then they start to creatively think of, well, here's what we should do. Well, the best thing to do is to think about the problem first, understand all of the information around the problem and truly understand the problem. And that's what gathering data is all about. And then moving on to the next step. The next step is identifying potential solutions. So once I have identified the problem and I have gone through this process of gathering data and having a better understanding of what the problem is, what are the symptoms, what does it appear to be, what appears to be the causes, and then I can sit down and think about potential solutions. And of course, everybody has a little different version of this, right? Research your options, brainstorming solutions, identifying solutions, sometimes drawing conclusions. But it could be, this idea of identifying what solutions are there, but then at the same time, I need to be able to evaluate those solutions, right? Identifying those solutions and then evaluating those particular solutions. Of course, the next step is selecting one of those solutions or making a decision, right? Deciding which alternative solution is the best solution given the situation. All right, and so then we go through this whole notion, and everybody who has some sort of steps to problem solving will talk about selecting a solution. Well, it sounds really simple, except it needs to be the solution that is selected needs to be based on what? It needs to be based on all the information that we have concerning the situation. And so while it sounds simple and it's just one step, it does take critical thinking skills to A, identify solutions, and B, make a decision on which solution will best fit and solve the problem. And then, of course, the last step is typically something around implementing a solution, and it can be, implementing and tracking a solution, reviewing the outcome, taking actions, implementing solutions, monitoring, and making adjustments over time. But it's always the same thing. It is always implementing the solution that we have selected. And so, as you can see, we have all, and I just have five here, but you can easily come up with five more steps to gathering, to making decisions and solving problems, and they will always sort of look the same way. Sometimes, if the term decision making is used, the steps will look a little bit different, as opposed to if someone is talking about solving a problem versus making a decision. But in both cases, they will basically have all of these sorts of steps associated with them. But here's where the problem starts, and that is the process is way more dynamic and personal than this suggests, and these steps suggest. And here's what I mean by this. Everybody needs to develop the way that they best function in terms of coming up with solutions. And it needs to be tracked in terms of how successful you are in selecting the right solutions over time. And so while this process is presented as a set of steps, the process tends to be more dynamic than a step process. And when we say a process is more dynamic, that means that we have these steps, but I go about identifying solutions, and then it turns out that I need to go back to the beginning again because maybe I didn't identify the problem correctly, or I need to go back and look at the problem that we identified originally, and the data that we collected maybe doesn't help us determine which solution is the best thing. So then I need to go back. And so this process is more iterative. It has more loops in it, feedback loops and loops where we go back and do certain things. And so while everybody says, oh, here's the steps, it's not like I put the information in, I grind the little handle, and it's like a jack in the box, and I keep grinding it, and the song plays, and all of a sudden the jack in the box pops open, and there's my solution. That's not really the way it works. And so you need to understand that the process is more dynamic. It probably, in some cases, the solutions are sort of obvious. In other cases, the solutions are not obvious at all. I started consulting um, uh, 45 years ago or so, and when we did our first couple of consulting jobs, luckily I was working with someone who was an experienced consultant, and I watched that person um, go through this decision making process and problem solving process, and looking at what data they had versus the solutions, and going back and saying, well, we need to go back and look at this, and we need to go back and look at this. And in some cases, things went fairly quickly and smoothly. In other cases, it took more thought than that. I have this famous story that we were charged with working for the SBD, the Small Business Development Authority, on for a person who was a truck farmer in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and he wanted the SBA to approve a loan so that he could get an additional truck to deliver the fruits and vegetables he was growing. Truck farmers are people who grow fruits and vegetables, and then they deliver them by truck to um, small grocery stores and other outlets that sell fruits and vegetables. So and so um, a friend of mine and myself were assigned to this particular process, and we went through a very elaborate decision making process and everything, because the SPDA was paying us, and we wanted to make sure that the person really and truly understand what was going on in their business. And so as we went through this, and we kept looking at the data and looking at the data, we had finally decided that one of the problems was that he was charging less for the vegetables and fruits than it costs for him to produce and deliver them. And so we had this elaborate presentation that we put together for him. And at the end of the day, the conclusion of the presentation was, you're charging the wrong prices. So this isn't a matter of how much of what ability you have to deliver fruits and vegetables. This is actually a pricing problem, and we need to think about coming up with a different set of prices. And so we went through this whole presentation, and it was about a 45-minute presentation. And back then, it was before we had PowerPoint and things like that. And so our presentation was multimedia with slide projectors and overhead screens and all kinds of different things. And it was relatively sophisticated. And so when we got done, the person that was doing this with me, his name was Rich. He said to the person, and it was just this person sitting there by himself, and we were making this big time presentation to him, much like a giant ad agency might do. And so Rich said to him, "So do you understand now what the issue is?" And he looked at Rich and he looked at me and he said, "Yeah, but if I just had one more truck." And so the truth is that he never really did understand the solution. And so, that was partially maybe a problem of presentation, but it's also the notion that he just wanted a truck. And he didn't really care about what information that we were interested in providing to him. He didn't care what process we went through. And even though we had gone through a very dynamic process and figured out what his issue was, he didn't. That wasn't what he was. He really wanted another truck, and that was the end of the day. And so understand that the decision making process is not a set of steps. It's way more dynamic than that. So in many cases, the specific solution is developed by looking at the situation, exploring alternatives, maybe going back and matching them up with the goals, and then maybe modifying them to best fit the situation, and then maybe having to go back and collect more data and maybe identify modified alternatives, and going through that process a number of times until we come up with the best possible solution. And of course, famous quote by General George Patton, one of the great military leaders in the U.S. military during World War II, is that one tries to make sure that the plans fit the circumstances. And of course, the plans are all based on us making decisions as to what strategy we are going to use to achieve a goal or objective. And so the process is more dynamic than that. The other part of this, of course, is that it's more personal than this. Everybody needs to develop a decision making process, a problem solving process that is works for them. And you learn that not by simply developing a process and saying that's going to be my process, but you learn that over time and by watching other people make decisions and making decisions and solving problems in a critical thinking way on your own. You then develop your own personal process. But always remember the famous Einstein quote. Remember, the Einstein quote is if I had an hour to solve a problem to save the world, I would spend 55 minutes on identifying and understanding the problem and 5 minutes on coming up with a solution. And so when we look at the basic problem solving or decision making steps, Einstein's argument is spend the time on the front end. Spend your time defining the problem, collecting data, identifying solutions. That is, understanding the situation, doing a situation analysis, and then identifying solutions. And then it should be it tends to be a much shorter process in evaluating solutions and selecting the solution that best fits the situation. We go back to a famous quote by General Dwight Eisenhower, and in his quote, he always said, uh, "Plans are nothing, planning is everything." And of course, in that particular quote, what Eisenhower was talking about is that going through the process, going through the steps, going through the process of being a data driven decision making person, you will there do a better job of coming up with logical solutions than if you simply want to go immediately to solutions. Another real quick example of this is that many of you know I have an international case competition team that every year we are assigned a problem, a marketing problem, and our job is to come up with a consulting based solution for that problem. And we've worked with a number of companies. We've worked with let's see, more recently Amazon, Pods moving system. We have worked with Vitamin Water. We have worked with Kodak many years ago with Kodak when Kodak was trying to figure a way to save their film making company. Um, but at the end of the day, we are very, very data driven. But when we first read a case and first read the case brief that we are typically given, this is very much like a first session that you have as a consultant, and we sit down with the company and they tell us what the problem is. We immediately have members on the team that say, "I know the solution." And of course, that's this danger that we have of coming to conclusions and selecting a solution before we fully understand the situation. And of course, I see that all the time, especially with our students, but or not just our students, but students in general that haven't made lots and lots of decisions. Their temptation is to jump to a conclusion that they think is right without truly spending the time to define the problem, collect data, and identify the potential best solutions and start to evaluate those solutions. So always remember the famous Einstein quote: "If I had an hour to solve a problem that would save the world, I would spend 55 minutes understanding the problem and 5 minutes trying to solve it." Some of the problem solving skills that we always talk about and things that you might want to think about. All right. So one is this notion of becoming an active listener. They always say, "Oh, you need to be an active listener." Well, that's not really exactly right. I like to argue that you need to become an active learner. That is, you need to always be learning. You need to always be identifying new information when you see it. And this, of course, includes being an active listener, that is listening to people talk about things. Every morning, I typically get up with the markets. I'm up around 3 a.m. The markets open, of course, at 6:30, and there's typically a couple of lead-in shows on the cable financial news shows, and so I sit around and I listen to the talking heads talk about what's going on in the market. And so I usually just have it on in the background as I'm doing other things around here, getting ready for class or getting ready for a consulting day or getting ready for a research day, or whatever it is that I'm working on at the time. And so I'm always listening for new information. I'm always watching for new information. Many active learners are visual learners, and of course you then learn by watching stuff, by seeing stuff, by being an observer. And sometimes when we talk about being an active learner, it is sensing things. That is, I put together ideas that fit together many years ago. My very first academic research project was based on putting together information from two different, very different fields of study and ideas, and then blending them together into a research question that had not yet been addressed. And of course, it was it was more, and it appeared to be serendipitous, but it really wasn't. It really was the fact that that I over time and having thought about it for a while, realized how these things fit together. And so I refer to that as sort of sensing. That is, I get a feeling, I have a sense of what is going on. And of course today we get a lot of that. Where of course we are now starting to enter the political season, and there'll be lots of different pieces of data that are thrown at us, some more accurate than others. But at the end of the day, our job is to um, actively listen and learn. Not just listen, but actually learn by listening, watching, and using all of your senses to gather data. And then, of course, the second problem-solving skill is the ability to do research. I have this happen all the time. I'll ask my students, "Well, what about this?" And students simply Google it. And if they Google it and it's not on the first page of the Google results, what do they say? That information is not available. Well, Google is not infallible, and also Google is not the only research tool available. And other people will say, well, now I don't need to do any of that now because I just type in the question in AI and I let AI do it. Well, the problem, of course, is that AI is only good as the algorithms and the programming that went in behind it. And in many cases, they miss critical pieces of information. And AI is not really good at adjusting data that's available to specific situations. This is where personal critical thinking skills come into play. Okay, and so when we do research, there are two types of research that we always want to think about. One, of course, is identifying secondary data, which is data that someone else has collected and that you can generally use for your own benefit. Another type of data is considered to be primary data, where I have to go out and collect the data myself. This could be things like focus groups and surveys and sales data that we have in our own data in our own business databases, those sorts of things. And of course, secondary data is things like MRI data, data from Mintel, all kinds of secondary data that's readily available for our use. And so there are different kinds of data, and of course, different kinds of data result with have different concerns and different uses and different assumptions that are made in collecting it that we have to make sure that we understand, so we understand what the quality of that data is all about. Um, and so there is the ability to collect data. Now, when we say collecting data, many people think that that's only numerical data. That's not right. Research and collecting data is collecting all sorts of facts and identifying all kinds of data, not just numerical data. Next, of course, is the analysis stage. Good problem solvers have the ability to analyze information. Okay, that's this notion of taking data and turning it into information. All right, and then taking that information and turning it into knowledge. For us to be able to do an analysis, we need to understand how the numbers fit together. We need to understand perhaps how this particular problem or solution fits together. That is, identifying not only the problem, but what the causes are for that problem, because we might need a solution that eliminates the causes rather than the symptoms of the problem. And so sometimes we see a piece of data that seems to be wrong, and we assume that that is somehow the problem. And really, the problem is what? The problem is the root cause and not some sort of symptom that we've identified. And then, of course, it is this whole notion of taking this data, turning it into information. That is, taking data and putting it in a format that it is easy to turn that data into information about the problem at hand, and then taking that information and analyzing it and understanding it so that you become more knowledgeable about the particular situation, the problem, and potential solutions, and then identifying solutions, evaluating them, and selecting one. So it's data to information, information to knowledge, and knowledge into solutions or making decisions. Another problem solving skill is creativity, but it's not creativity that you are often taught in your classes. It is creativity that is goal directed creativity, and that is creativity that is bound by reality, creativity that is specific to a particular situation. So, and it is also creativity that's designed to reach a particular goal. And so when we talk about creativity, we're not talking about wild out of the box creativity. We're talking about goal directed creativity. The next thing that's critical is motivation based on communication. And of course, we have a famous quote, and that is motivation will never win the battle, but low morale can defeat any strategy. So, part of good problem solving skills is being able to communicate what is going on in a transparent way to motivate people to all get on the same page and everybody pull together in the same direction to try to solve a particular problem. And then, of course, there's this notion of problem solving skills, and that is decision making skills. And of course, good decision makers are always data driven. And the decision making aspect of problem solving is really where the critical thinking starts to come in. That is, understanding the situation, understanding what the data is trying to tell us, and then coming up with the correct or the best possible solution given the situation. Critically thinking through the problem. And of course, finally, the other problem solving skill that's crucial is team building, right? And we all understand the power of teamwork. For many years, I coached college football. We never really had necessarily the absolute best players in our conference or compared to the teams that we played against. We used to play against, even though we were a Division 1AA football team at the University of Northern Iowa, we would play against some 1A teams which had better players. But we often won the game because we understood what we were trying to accomplish and we played together better as a team. And that is the synergistic value of everybody working in the same direction and understanding what each person's role is, and everybody doing their absolute best for the team. So team building is a crucial problem solving skill. And then, of course, there are the analytical skills. The analytical skills include things like critical thinking skills. That is, the ability to understand the situation and the ability to take the data that's available and identify logical solutions. We talk about critical thinking all the time. Yeah. Critical thinking, critical thinking. Well, critical thinking is nothing other than becoming a data driven decision making individual. That is, making decisions based on the situation and the available data. And then, of course, another analytical skill is this whole notion of data analysis. That is, understanding how all this data fits together. Sometimes we refer to this as modeling. Typically, this takes some Excel skills because we often have to put data into an Excel spreadsheet and then try to analyze that data using the Excel, the power of Excel and the Excel formulas, and understanding how these numbers fit together and how we can create numbers by taking the data and maybe changing the format of that data. And then, of course, there's things like statistical analysis. One of the questions that students always ask is, how come I had to take that statistics class and then I never use any of it? Well, we're going to try to use some of it in this class. And to become good at data analysis, you need to have some knowledge of statistics and how statistics are used to make better decisions. And then, of course, another aspect of data analysis is trying to understand what the data is trying to tell you. So when you see a table of data, that table is trying to tell you something. I have so many students who, instead of putting a table together to show the data and then telling the story that the data shows us, they want to write the data into text. One of the things that you should never do is take data that is already tabled or data and try to write it into text rather than putting it in a table. By putting data in a table or in a chart or in a figure, it is much easier to understand the data. The whole notion that a picture is worth 1,000 words, and it will help you to understand what the data is trying to tell you. A couple of quick examples of understanding what data is trying to tell you. Many years ago, one of my very first jobs when I was still in high school was I was a pump jockey at a Clark gas station in the Midwest. And so we used to pump gas for cars. This was back in time when there was nobody pumped their own gas. Every gas station had people who would come out and pump the gas for you while you remained in your car. Well, one of the people I worked with was an expert at horse racing, and he taught myself and a number of us how to read the racing form. And of course, the racing form is a newspaper that is put out every day, and it gives all the information on each horse that is in each race at the local track and their previous records and all the data about that horse. That is, it has all of the data readily available about each of the horses. Um, and it's all looks like complicated data until you understand that data put together is trying to help you to determine which horse is the most likely to win the race. And of course, everybody analyzes that data a little bit differently. But the whole point behind having a racing form in front of you with all the data on each of the horses is to try to figure out what that data is trying to tell you so that you can become a better horse picker for horse racing. It's just an example of how data is used, how data analysis is used to make better decisions. In this case, picking the horses that are most likely to win a race. Another example of this, of course, is poker. So you watch poker on television. You notice how easy it is to watch poker on television to determine the right strategy? That's because on TV they show you everybody's cards, and they put the percentages of winning up because they're calculated based on the cards that are available and what information has already been shown. And it's kind of an interesting thing. But the problem is if you're playing poker, you have to make all those calculations in your head as you go along. It turns out that great poker players are able to look at the information that they have available and calculate the odds in their heads. So it's not so the person that wins at poker, some of it is determined by which cards, the luck of which cards you get in every situation. But the best poker players almost always end up on top at the end of the day because they have the ability to analyze all of the data that is sitting around on them in front of the table, including the odds, including money management, and including reading the competitors to decide on how to play each particular hand. That, once again, is this notion of data analysis. All right. And then another analytical skill is being able to do the research. And of course, not just Googling it, but actually finding the data that you need. There are two parts to this, of course, right? One part of this has to do with identifying the data that you need. And the second part is actually finding that data. Okay. And then the last analytical skill, of course, is developing a process, a problem solving process that you might use. The next thing, of course, that we talk about a lot is critical thinking skills. Critical thinking skills include observation. This is that notion of active learning, right? That is, looking at something and figuring out what is going on, observing the right things. All right, and that is, it's a little bit like a magic trick. Sometimes you are influenced by looking in the wrong direction. When you're looking left, you should have been looking right. So observation is a critical thinking skill. Analysis is a critical thinking skill. When we talk about analysis, it's not just data analysis, it's analyzing all the data that is available in front of you. Facts and figures and other pieces of information that might not be numerical, but influence what the right strategy might be going forward. So understanding the situation, identifying logical solutions. Of course, some of the aspect of critical thinking includes inferential thinking, right? The inference is a skill that involves drawing conclusions about the information that you collect. That is, taking the information that you collect and turning it into knowledge. Data to information, information to knowledge. And then, of course, there is this idea of communication, the ability to present data driven recommendations. Remember the story that I just gave you a little bit ago about Rich and myself and the truck farmer from Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And then, of course, the other critical thinking skill is this problem solving. All right. And that is this notion of deciding on looking at all the data and deciding on the best course of action moving forward based on the available data. Um, and of course, making sure that the particular solution that we come up with is related to the goals and fits the individual situation. So someone always says, well, what about developing critical thinking skills? All right. So how do we develop critical thinking skills? Ask questions. Be self-aware. Be honest with yourself about your own personal biases and your own strengths. I find, the older I get, the more biased I am about different kinds of solutions and different kinds of things that go on. And of course, we tend to be biased against things that we don't know very much about. And we all think that we know more than everyone else. Well, at some point in time, you have to be a little bit more humble than that and a little bit self-aware that you have your own biases. So let other ideas and other solutions that you don't typically like the sound of, let's at least consider them. All right, and try to be more open-minded and evaluate things in an objective way rather than in a biased way. Evaluate opposing views. Don't just try to say no. Try to be more open-minded. Look at the positive side of all these alternatives and ask yourself, maybe this alternative is better than I thought it was. Consider the consequences. Remember, you ever hear this thing? Unintended consequences. This happens a lot in making decisions and solving problems. I solve one problem and create another. And those, of course, are those unintended consequences. Trying to figure out what the consequences of our decision might be and what might be the strengths and weaknesses moving forward once we implement that solution. Another develop critical thinking skills is maybe to reverse your thinking. It's this notion that everybody is thinking in this direction. Maybe I need to go backwards and think in the opposite direction. I'm pretty good at, so everybody says, well, what we need to do is we need to come up with solutions that solve this problem. Maybe every once in a while you ought to change that thinking and say, well, what's the opposite of that solution? And let's look at what the opposite of that solution might look like and what might happen if we were to implement that. If nothing else, it gives us an opportunity to understand the situation and the potential consequences better. Some other critical thinking tips that we often use is we read widely. My argument is learn actively from a variety of sources. Be more like a sponge. How many of you actually spend time reading and thinking and learning more about marketing? And how many of you sit in a class and thumb through your social media stuff and TikTok rather than paying attention and trying to learn everything you can? Remember my little story about my buddy Connor, who used to come home from school every day, and I would say to him, Connor, what did you learn every day? What did you learn today at school? And Connor used to always say the same thing. I learned everything. Many of you are not learning everything because you're simply not paying attention and you act like you're not interested in a area that you are getting a degree in and yet your career will be in. Become motivated to Learn the most that you can about marketing. I hear students all the time say, "Oh, I want to be in social media marketing." Well, social media marketing is a very numerical, very metric based business. So you need to spend time learning about it. It's not about posting things. It's about understanding what draws people to you, and how you successfully build a following, and all the metrics associated with that. Second critical thinking tip is practice empathy. Empathize with others. Imagine putting yourself in the other person's shoes and looking at situations from the marketer's perspective. Remember the stuff that we talked about with our good friend Peter Drucker. Marketing is looking at the business from the customer's point of view. In many cases, when you think about identifying solutions to a problem, one of the perspectives you need to look at this from is the customer's perspective. Another critical thinking tip is to think for yourself. Don't always try to find someone else's solution. I get so tired of people saying, "Well, I need an example. I need a template. I need for you to just tell me what the answer is." That's not good critical thinking. Good critical thinking is think for yourself. Practice becoming an active learner. And instead of just an active learner, practice being an active learner. Learn more about the situation. Once you're working on a situation, become aware and spend some time learning more about the situation. Um, Consider the possibility, even at the end of this, that you might be wrong. Be inquisitive, of course, and the other thing, of course, is exercise your body and mind. Every single day, you should do things that enhance your critical thinking skills by making sure that you are doing some physical fitness every day. You're going out and getting exercise, and you're exercising your mind every day. As we said from Professor Kingsfield, at the goal at the end of the day is to get you to think like a professional marketer. Remember the old Kipling method. The Kipling method is named after Rudyard Kipling's poem, I Keep Six Honest Serving Men. And so he highlights 6 important questions that you need to ask to solve a problem. That is, what is the problem? Why is the problem important? When did the problem arise, and when does it need to be solved? How did the problem happen? Where is the problem occurring? And who does the problem affect? And so, this idea of asking the why questions, and the how questions, and the where questions, and the who questions, the famous 6 question Kipling method of understanding a situation. Just one of many approaches that you might use, but many people like to keep that in the back of their mind, and they might modify this and use their own name instead of the Kipling method. They might call it the Mike Jones method. The 5 whys, which is very, very similar, right? The 5 whys method is look for why, using the chain of inquiry that builds off the first question. When you perform the analysis and you look at the why of the problem and its causes, the 5 whys. Why? And you always have little kids often do this to you. You start to explain something to them, and they keep saying, "Why? Why is that right? Why is that? Why is that?" And eventually, you get better at understanding the cause and whether or not you have the right solution if you can answer the question about the 5 whys. I like to make sure that people understand the power and importance of incubation. Do all of you believe in the subconscious? So a lot of the time, and this goes back to my um, um, uh, 50 some years now of being a consulting and being a business owner, going all the way back to when I first got out of college, and besides being an industrial engineer, bought and ran a college bar in a college town. The importance of incubation. And here's what I mean by the importance of incubation. Do you believe in the subconscious? Let me give you an example. So sometimes you have this happen to you. You'll be trying to remember some classmate's name that you had that was in one of your classes when you were maybe in junior high, and you can't remember their name, or you're trying to remember a band group that had played a particular song, or you had gotten a chance to see, or some piece of information that you just can't remember what information it was. You can't remember the answer to the question. And what happens is you finally just decide that you can't remember. I had this happen to me yesterday. I was trying to remember one of the outfielders for the Milwaukee Brewers in 1982. One of their players that was one of their famous players in 1982. One of they were called the wall bangers because they were their home run hitters for the Milwaukee Brewers back in 1980, 81, 82, and 83. And I couldn't remember that name. And so at some point in time, you give up. You can't remember. Now, some of you then will just try to Google it, and once you can't find it in Google, you'll just think, well, it's not available, and let it go. But here's what happens: about a day or two later, you'll be driving down the street, or you'll be out working on something else, and what happens? Bang! The answer pops into your head, and suddenly you remember the answer, and you weren't even thinking about it. How does that happen? Well, it's because of this concept of incubation. That is, you put that question into your mind, and while it wasn't front of the mind and it wasn't something you were actively working on, your subconscious was still trying to find that data. And so here's how I always describe this. And of course, you might get a chuckle out of this. It's like there's a little person in your head, in your brain, and when somebody asks a question about something, the first thing that little person does is try to find that situation. So he starts looking through file cabinets, and he thinks, well, it should be in this file, ordered this way. And and it's not there. And then he looks someplace else, and then he looks someplace else, and eventually you quit thinking about it yourself in terms of the front of your mind. But what happens is, in the back of your mind, in the subconscious part of your mind, that little guy is still looking. And then all of a sudden, even though it's not something that you are actively thinking about, that little person eventually finds the file. And you're driving down the street, and then all of a sudden you remember. Okay, and so that's this notion of the subconscious coming up with solutions. The same thing happens when we are trying to come up with strategies and solutions. I've had this happen a number of times where we have a bunch of information, we're trying to figure out how the pieces fit together. We have situation analysis things about the competitors, about the customers, about our internal things, about the industry, about the macro environment, and all those pieces sort of fit together, and it looks like a jigsaw puzzle on the table, but we can't figure out how the pieces fit together. One of the best things to do is to make sure you understand what all the pieces of information are, and then go do something else. Okay, spend some time understanding the situation, and then let the information incubate. One of my favorite things back in the old days was I used to run every single day, and of course, when you run, your body exerts something called these a a particular drug into your system that makes you more euphoric and makes you they're called endorphins, and they make you more euphoric, and they get your mind and body working more effectively and more efficiently and more creatively. And so you might be out going for a run or something, doing something else, and what? Suddenly all the pieces fit together in your mind, and you come up with a solution. And that's all what I refer to as incubate. That is, make sure that you have all the information and you've gone through the information. And if you can't come up with a solution right away, let the stuff sit in your mind for a while and see if your subconscious can't help you come up with that solution. The importance of incubation. And then, of course, there is finally the importance of being data driven. Marketing today is data driven. It is no longer about hunches. Good decisions today are based on the available data, not just numbers, but all kinds of data. And of course, this comes to that basic notion of the keyword of business and marketing. Analytics. Everybody talks about business analytics, marketing analytics. You know what analytics is? Analytics is data-driven decision making. It's taking that data, putting it together in a way that that data becomes information. Taking that information and turning it into knowledge of understanding what the situation is all about, and then making decisions based on your knowledge. That's what business analytics is all about. And so one of the main objectives of this course, and one of our main objectives here at the university and in the College of Business and the Department of Marketing International Business, is to help you develop the skills associated with data-driven marketing decision making. And of course, in terms of international business students, it is international marketing decision making. So the focus of this course is the use of data to make better decisions rather than just hunches and some sort of guessing. We don't want to guess. We want to make decisions based on available data. So in summary, you need to build your own approach to solving problems. This is not really about this is not all about understanding the steps and going through the steps. You need to develop your own approach to becoming better at solving problems. But that approach needs to be data driven. So think about becoming a data driven decision maker.